Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marble Snap video. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience climbing the ladder this month and the experience I have heard from a lot of other players attempting to do the same. So I think there are a handful of reasons why the ladder climb this month really feels a lot harder than it ever has been. And this is kind of ironic, right? Because we just got a change that on paper looks like it should boost being able to climb. If you haven't already heard, there was a change made recently where once you get to a new rank bracket, so every one of the 10 ranks where you get a reward, instead of getting an additional 10 cubes for hitting that milestone, you now get an additional 50. So for example, if you go from 79 to 80, it propels you to 85 instead of 81 like before. So with that change, it seemed like, all right, this is a good thing. They're trying to make ladder less grindy, and in general, it was a good change. But that makes it even feel stranger when people are feeling like they have a harder time climbing right now than they have traditionally in the past when that wasn't a thing at all. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why I think that is the case. Now, part of it is due to the metagame we have ourselves in. I talked about this a lot in the video the other day, and we talked about it quite a bit on the newly released podcast episode, which I'll have a link to in the description if you want a bit more in-depth discussion on everything going on in the game. I had a really fun time recording that the other night, and I think there's definitely some good stuff worth checking out there. But one of the things that's obvious why this is harder is because we are in kind of a 2-deck format right now. And one thing I see a lot of people get kind of confused by is, well, if these decks are so broken, why am I not just climbing super easily with the broken decks? And there are a few reasons for that. One, mirror matches. Mirror matches in any card game usually have a bit more draw RNG to them than you have when you're not in a mirror match, because your decks are both trying to do the same thing. It's only natural that you're not always going to get the cards you want in the order you want, and your opponent might, and that can make things a bit more tricky. The other thing is one of the best decks in the game, the Thanos Lockjaw deck, is one of the most, if not the most, RNG heavy deck we've ever had in Snap, where it is kind of difficult to reasonably predict their outcomes. Yes, maybe we can predict they're going to be playing a Lockjaw early on and cheating some stuff out, but the range of outcomes that can happen from that deck is very, very wide. They could low roll on the Lockjaw and not get anything big. They could high roll on the Lockjaw and have multiple 5 or 6 cost stuff out before turn 5. So there's a lot of different ways it can go, and as a consequence of this, it feels like people are being much more conservative with the amount that they are snapping. And we have a little bit of a graph here that I thought was very interesting that kind of demonstrates this. So this was my climb. I think these were my stats from 96 to 100, I believe. This is using the deck I posted the other day, the Sarah Darkhawk deck. If you want to check that out, I'll have a link in the description to that as well. But these are my stats, and I think it paints a pretty interesting picture about one of the reasons why the climb feels like such a meat grinder right now, with so many players getting stuck in the 70s or the 80s range, when oftentimes these same players were infinite by now in past seasons. I've noticed a ton of players have trouble with this season where they feel like they just aren't making any progress, or they're staying exactly where they are. And I think this is one of the reasons for that. Because of how these decks are warping the metagame, we're seeing way, way more 1 to 2 cube games, and we aren't seeing as many of these 4 or 8 cube games that really kind of accelerate your climb up the ladder. So looking at my record here, we can see the first 2 biggest pieces of the pie here are 1 cube wins. So I had 16 of those, being 24% of the climb, and then 2 cube wins, which was 14 and 21% of the climb. So right here, 45% of my total games here were 1 to 2 cube wins. Next up, unsurprisingly, the other biggest pieces here are 1 and 2 cube losses. 2 cube losses made up 16% from 11 losses, and 1 cube losses were 10, making up 15%. So that right there is another 31%. if we total that up with our prior percentage here of 45, we have 76%. 3/4 of the game and this pie chart were 1 to 2 cube losses. Now, I don't have my statistics from the prior months, but going off of memory, I've hit infinite every season since launch, and it's never felt more apparent to me that you just are seeing people leave games so often and not snap even when they're in what would normally be considered a very advantageous position. And the reason for this is there's so much uncertainty right now in how the game can go, mainly because of the Thanos deck, that people are much more afraid to snap in a position where they might be ahead. And that gets compounded by the fact that a lot of these Thanos games end up being mirror matches, where RNG is even more of a big factor, both in draw RNG and lockjaw RNG, and even Reality Stone RNG and stuff like that. So over 75% here of the games 1 to 2 cube games, and I think this really tells us a big part of the reason why this climb has felt so difficult for many players is because we just aren't seeing those cube gains or even losses that are advancing you up the ladder. It's just not happening as much. We can see the other numbers here. 4 cube wins, I got 7 of those, so 10%. 8 cube wins, I got 4 of those, so 6%. And if I recall correctly, only 2 of those, I believe, were against real players. I think 2 of those 8 cube wins were actually against bots, and bots are actually a relevant part of this discussion, which we'll get to in a minute. 4 cube losses, had 2 of those. There was 1 tie, so no cubes gained or lost. And then I had 1 8 cube loss that actually would have been a win, but some very, very unfortunate Scarlet Witch RNG turned what would normally be a winning game into a losing game. But nonetheless, we can see 4 and 8 cube losses making up only 25% of the climb feels really off compared to prior seasons. And I think being able to see and visualize it like this really helps kind of picture why the climb feels like it's taking forever, why people who normally are in the 80s or 90s or infinite right now feel like they're stuck on this infinite treadmill in the 70s or the 80s. Now, there's another reason I think this is happening, and this one is not as clearly visible of a reason, but it's something I've noticed. I've talked to other players about it, and they seem to have noticed it too, and this may depend on where you're at on the ranked ladder. I'm just speaking to my experience. But in the last few months, in the last, I think, 3 or so seasons, I have noticed a trend. And that trend is basically we would get bots from 70 to 80 on a season reset. Now, worth disclaiming, I am not someone who is in the bot infinite MMR, where some high-ranked players face mainly bots. That's not where I've been. But typically, when the season resets, I was finding I get a lot of bots from rank 70 to 80, and then after rank 80, there really were almost 0 bots. I mean, maybe you'd get a bot once in like 50 or 100 games or something, but it felt like they almost entirely disappeared for me after rank 80. This season, it has felt very, very different. And so what is different about it? I noticed there were significantly less bots in the 70 to 80 range. However, it seems I got more bots than I used to get by a pretty wide margin in the 80 plus range. So I feel like something has happened here with the bots, and I think that's another reason where players who are used to getting these bots early on, and the bots actually do serve a valid function, which is they kind of inject cubes into the game's matchmaking economy. Injecting all these cubes at the start kind of helps players feel a little bit more free to risk these 4 or 8 cube games. And now that there are less of those, people are a lot more, tight with their cubes. They don't feel like they can just openly risk it, and that gets compounded when we don't really feel certain how we know the game is going to play out. It's much, much harder to make reasonable predictions due to the meta environment we're in right now. Now, I think a lot of people probably haven't noticed this directly because the game doesn't exactly go out of its way to tell you when you're facing a bot. I don't think they want you to really know. There are ways you can basically deduce that you are facing a bot. There is a spreadsheet with a bot name list for one. There are also different factors like being able to see a inked or a gold split with no secondary effect, or a normal background with a secondary effect on the card. Code Deco, another awesome content creator for Marvel Snap, they've gone over quite a bit the identifying characteristics of bots, so I'd actually recommend checking out their video on that if you want to learn a bit more about that. Because truthfully, I think the only reason I was able to complete my climb this month was, even though 75% of my games are those 1 to 2 cube losses, the handful of bot games that gave me, 4 or 8 cubes, and not all my big gains were from bots. I think it was maybe 50-50 or slightly more humans than bots there. But without those bots doing it, I'm sure I would still be working on this climb, even though it should feel a lot faster with the new bonus cube system. So I thought this was something worth talking about because I think there's a lot of frustration right now, not only because of the metagame, but because people feel like they just aren't making any progress. And it's okay to not make progress, but I think the most frustrating element is it's not clear why the progress isn't being made. I don't have a problem losing a game or losing a bunch of cubes if I feel like I'm learning something from that experience. If I can see, okay, I lost this game because I made a mistake that I should have been able to analyze properly, didn't analyze it properly, now I know for the next time. And I feel like that just isn't happening. Even in the other really warped meta we had with Zabu, at least then it felt more clear when I was supposed to snap, when I was supposed to retreat, when I had a chance to win a game versus when I had no chance at all. And I think that is just totally up in the air right now. So people are more tight on their cubes, and then you throw in the bot factor where it seems there are less bots in that 70 to 80 range. So people are not getting as many cubes early on, so they're even more reluctant to risk their cubes when they're not sure about how the outcome is going to go. So I thought this was pretty interesting. I wanted to share this because I think it's a very frustrating experience for a lot of players, and it's hard to really identify why this is happening. So I wanted to give some reasons here as to why this is happening. This is the first month where I feel like I didn't make it to Infinite because I made a lot of skilled decisions about the game. I feel like I made it to Infinite because I got lucky and was able to dodge the bad matchup that farmed the deck I was playing, which is dodging the Thanos Leech deck, or just having the Thanos deck not draw or not play their Leech that game. It doesn't feel like I made these meaningful decisions to counter them. It feels more that I was just, yes, I did have to play correctly and use my deck to the best of its ability, but it felt like more of that was just hoping they didn't have the one card that makes my deck unplayable. And it's not just, the deck I played that feels that way. So those are some thoughts. I just wanted to get this out there because I know it's a really frustrating experience for a lot of people right now. And truthfully, my best advice, I don't think there's a secret to climbing this ladder right now, other than it'll probably help you if you can get better at identifying when you are running into bots, so you can maximize the amount of cubes you get off them to help boost you a little bit ahead. Bots also seem to retreat a bit more aggressively than they used to, so I think it's another thing that is also impacting the amount of cubes flowing into the game right now, on top of all the other factors we mentioned. But my advice is, I think it is kind of a fool's errand to try overly hard to push through to Infinite right now. I think it is more of an exercise in frustration than one of skill expression. And if I were someone who wants to hit Infinite this month, I think I would just log in, do my dailies, and wait for this patch. It really kind of sucks that is the best option, but I think, if you value your experience and enjoyment with the game, I don't think pushing really hard for the climb is going to enhance that right now. And I think you're better off waiting for the balance patch, which is expected around the time of the variant rush on the 21st or the 20th, sometime around then. It sucks it's so far away. We still have probably like another week of this, which is really rough. But those are my thoughts, and so I wanted to get this out here. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Have you had a similar experience? Have you noticed that you've been getting less bots in the kind of 70 to 80 range? Have you noticed you're not getting as many 4 or 8 cube wins and losses as you used to? I would definitely really like to hear about your experience in the comments below. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.